people I work with are school teachers, and I started as a school teacher, and now I run these programs for the schools. So I know that later in your life, you went back in, and now you're teaching at Twin Butte School down here, and I wanted to ask you how that was and how it compared to schools from your day.
Okay. Is it all right if I start out from the beginning of my time at school?
I would love that.
Yeah. Well, this was when I started school. That was in about 1936, and life was different at that time. Lifestyle and our ways was mostly our really native ways. Life, our language was strong. The language we used it all in our own language. No one spoke English at the time when I started school. Some of my sisters were all older than I am, the youngest one, and they all spoke English because they went to school earlier time than I have. But the point is, when they got home, they didn't use the English language. It was all our own Mandan language, native tongue language. And that's kind of the way it was most of our lives from the time we were young till after we all left home, after we got up in this area. In those days, it was just our language and our ways of, getting around was they call nowadays, they call it horse and buggy, you know, at that time, old lumber wagons and whatever, team, and, on horseback, saddle horses, and that's the way we got around. No one hardly owned a car, just a very few, far and near, owning a car. All our transportation was done by horses, yet at that time. That's in 1936 that I remember. And then time went on till, my life was, I was kind of raised around mostly men, older men. My grandfather kept me. Lost my mother when I was quite young. And then my dad had to go out and do different work and here and there, odd jobs and whatever he could make $1 somewhere. That's kind of where he was at. All men at that time had to face that problem because the federal government didn't have any money to lend out to native people. All had to learn to put in a garden and farm, these type of things that we had to do. We had to do it or we did without. There was no choice. And that's kind of the way we lived, very hard life. I'm going to add in there, poor, very poor. And that's kind of the way I grew up. And I'm not going to go telling something else that's not there, because I'm just going to come right out and say I was poor. Most of us, if not all, was poor. And we were tied down in many different ways. If we had livestock, we had to brand them, and brand them with mark ID, which meant Indian Department, and our own brand on there. Kind of getting off the subject here, but anyhow, the schooling I started in them days was quite stricter than what it is today. And, you know, you had to mind the teacher. And that was kind of a number one thing in our school system. That the teacher said something, you had to try to learn it. And you were in his hands, or her hands, you might say. And they were very strict about it. And we lived a tough life to learn, because at home we never had no English language. It was all native language, like I said before. And it was kind of forced on us to learn English language. If you didn't learn it, you got punished for it, and you couldn't use your native tongue during school hours and stuff.
The teacher was white?
Yes. And there was no Indians ever employed in teaching or anything, or in any office. It was all white people running the government, who we hired, and that's the way we lived, under their orders, and that's what we lived. And even before it was a little harder, they say, you know, I tell you, you had to sign out when you left the reservation, you know, and sign back in when you come back in. This kind of life we lived, this is how we, I should say, how we were treated, how we had to be, you know, controlled by federal government.
Mm-hmm.
And they held us down every time. The reason why I got into livestock was when you want to sell an animal, you had to go ask the superintendent of the Berthold Reservation if you could sell that animal, to get some money out of it. Whatever little money that animal bring, and they weren't very much either that time. And then what they call boss farmer or farm agent, the title changed as time went by. And at the time, I think they called them boss farmers. They approved of giving you a brand release and the ID brand release because you were Indian and you're living on a reservation. That's the Indian Department. The federal government had control all over that. And then if you got money, amount of money, then they held that until the 20th of the month, early time in the years. They held that 20th. Then they give it to you. And they ask you, what are you going to do? What are you going to buy with it? What did you need? And then you had to tell them. And you had to purchase things that way. They give you a check, you know. And everybody got probably $20, $25 every month. If you had money in the agency, they put you on a budget, very tight budget. So you didn't get all the money you had coming into your own time. You were budgeted by the federal government.
Once a month.
And that's what we had to get by with, $20, $25, whatever it was they gave you. If you needed something real bad, they thought it was needed, they gave you a little more. That's kind of the way it was operated on.
It kind of sounds like parents and children.
Yeah. And that was because I've said now lately here, after I studied that a little bit, a native, or Indian, all the Indians here in America, we were considered wild Indians, or incompetent in mind. You didn't think like the white man thinks today, or in that time, you know, what they brought from overseas, we didn't know anything about. So we really